Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Chris with Gulo Solutions, and this is the Web Marketing Insights podcast. Very special episode today. Zach and I have a couple of great guests that we're just super excited to have with us. One is Dan Ritzke from Third Act Marketing. Dan, thanks for being with us. And Joe, we have Joe Martin from Martin Creative. Happy to have you here, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Does anyone really ever have Joe Martin? But all right, we'll go with it. Let's go with it.
All right. Appreciate it. So we're here to talk about today storytelling, digital marketing, conversion rate optimization, covering a lot of ground. And how do these things overlap? And how, as a marketer listening to this podcast, how can, what's important to take away from this? If you haven't heard of conversion rate optimization, then this is a perfect podcast for you, because it is a very important topic as a marketer to know. If you are familiar with that and aren't sure maybe what your next steps are, today's podcast is perfect for you as well. So want to make sure we back this out. And just, Zach, I want to kick it over to you and say, for those that are just on the podcast saying, I've heard of CRO, I know what it is, but can you just kind of fill me in on what it is and what it isn't as a marketer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we define conversion rate optimization is a couple things. For a typical web user, it's something as trivial as engagement, right? You're bringing someone to a page and you want them to do something. That can be literally read. That can be click on a button. That can be fill out a lead generation form. That can be purchase a product and go into the purchase funnel. So there's some very high level terms that we break these things down as, and the science of all of those things is actually conversion rate optimization. And what we wanted to try and dissect today a little bit are what is conversion rate optimization, one. Two, because it means something different to everybody. How do you talk to people about conversion rate optimization? Because when we talked about conversion rate optimization and say that or CRO, people's eyes just glaze over and we lose them. So never use that term if you're talking with a prospective client. That's number one. And then two, like Chris alluded, is what are the important aspects of conversion optimization to marketers and the people that are actually implementing these things. So those are the kind of the ideas that we've been tossing around, and that's why we brought in Joe and Dan to try and pluck these things apart with us today.
Yeah, that's perfect. Joe, I want to kick it over to you, and can you just let folks that haven't seen you speak yet or seen you on a podcast yet talk about your background a little bit and what's led you to focus on this conversion rate optimization thing and why it's so important and something as marketers that we really want to pay attention to.
Yeah, I started off as a web developer in the field, just learning how to code websites. From there, I went to school for design. After design school, I decided to start my own company. And it's there that all of a sudden, I think anyone who starts a company or even freelancers, you start to realize just how much more is involved in building a website in terms of even communication with a client, invoicing, everything you need to get across to do. If you have people you're working with, you have payroll and taxes, insurance. So start doing all that. And as I was building up, I really heavily got into the sales and the marketing side. And I started to realize just how important copy was in those regards, and that what you say is so very important. And for a while, I actually felt like I wasn't doing companies justice because I would design them a site and then say, here, go put in all your copy. When really it should have been, hey, what do you want to say? And then we'll design a site around it. Because what we really want from the site is it to convert. We want it to actually have you get new customers. And I think that's what makes it so important these days, is that this is all we're trying to do. When you spend money on AdWords or SEO, you're just trying to get people to become customers. But we kind of lose sight of this idea of, oh, we're just trying to get them to our website. It's like, no, we need to get them there, but then we need to convert them. We need to make them take some kind of action. And using the data, the analytics behind it, CRO is the future. this is where it's headed. Any company that's not looking at conversion rate optimization is already behind.
Those are great insights. And Dan, I want to kick it over to you. Based on what Joe said, he said something about messaging, and I think it's a great point to say it's one thing to design a website, but what are you building it for? What do you want it to do? And how are you going to say that? So can you just talk a little bit about your background? I know, you're a marketing, positioning, messaging, a consultant that works with clients all the time, and you've seen a wide spectrum of people and companies that have maybe been misguided in the way that they're thinking about the world of marketing. Is it features or benefits, or is it about actually the emotional connection that we're trying to make with people? And how does that relate to converting somebody on your website? Because it feels like such a process workflow based thing. But to Joe's point, messaging and how you say what you're saying is so important. So can you just fill us in on your background a little bit, why you think storytelling is such an integral part to what we do from emotional driven marketing and conversions?
Yeah, definitely. So my background, most of my career I spent working in advertising. I worked for ad agencies here in Chicago for a little over 11 years. And for as long as I can remember, to me, great marketing, effective marketing is always synonymous with great storytelling. A lot of times I think small businesses all the way up to Fortune 500 and 100 companies are kind of fall into a trap of getting into a habit of, using their marketing as kind of just a bullhorn to communicate features and benefits, and as a company, why we think we're great and why our product is great and how we're different and better than our competitors. And so we get so used to that over time that about a year ago, I decided to start my own company and to focus in on consulting and strategy and storytelling to really help companies. For me, it's really just getting back to the basics of what makes communicating effectively really comes down to with connecting with your audience. And for me, the best way to do that is getting back to the basics of really understanding your audience, figuring out what it is that they want, what is it that they need, figuring out as a company, if you have a product or a service, how is that solving a problem for your audience, and getting really, really clear on it's not about me. It's not about me as the business owner. It's about my audience, and the way that I'm going to connect with them is by telling really the best story that I can, that they're going to want to pay attention to. It's going to get their attention, and it's going to keep their attention. And that's the very first step to getting someone to convert or to take some kind of an action. You're never going to be able to do that unless you really are able to kind of hook them in. And for me, I saw a huge gap kind of in the marketplace of a lot of companies that are not really doing that real effectively, and it's a big missed opportunity. And so I think storytelling strategy is really synonymous and just kind of part of a CRO mindset.
And so one of the things that I love that Dan, you touched on there is this idea of you need to talk in the voice of the customer. And when I talk about this being kind of the future of what I see, is one of the things that I think I love about conversion optimization is it forces you to be empathetic. That as a company, you really need to get into the mind of your customer to understand what are they going through? How can I really help them? And then it's forcing you to think more about an individual and less about the dollars, which is just, for me, I think that's the biggest thing, that we're bringing a little humanity back into marketing here.
No, it's excellent. Absolutely excellent points. And Joe, I know that you have done some research and some original data that you have, and worked with companies on this. And you also have some points to look at, and how, I think it's 5 tips to do this better. So before we get into that, because I do want to, can you talk about what the what the data is saying? Do you have examples from your data as to why this is important, or what some conversion optimization success stories might look like, something like that?
Yeah, I can run you through a couple of them. And I guess the first thing to understand is conversion rate optimization happens in multiple places, because it can happen inside of an email, it can happen on a website, it can happen during a sales call. That every single one of those components can be conversions. And so we're kind of looking at things overall. But when we talk specifically about a website, we can use something as simple as A/B testing. And A/B testing, if you're familiar with it, is simple as saying this or that, and that's it, and letting people choose this or that and seeing what happens. And so this is one of the things that I offer for companies is we'll actually go on their website, make suggestions, and run the A/B tests for them to figure out which one converts higher. And it's amazing how small changes can have such a monumental impact that there's a company we're working with in Chicago. We rewrote the first sentence of their website, which should usually be your unique value proposition, lets people know who you are, what you do, why they want to work with you. We rewrote that in their call to action, and we saw a 35% increase in transactions. With a Florida company I worked with, we changed 2 words on her site. All we did was change the call to action, the words on it, and she saw a 28% increase in session value. And for a different company here in Chicago, they're a pizza tour in Chicago, which if you've never taken a pizza tour, what the hell is wrong with you? Go take a pizza tour. But for them,
Absolutely.
we ended up we rearranged the order of the tours on their homepage. So instead of it looking like the price was going up from 89 to 119 to 159, we switched it. So we actually put the most expensive tour first. And so it looked like the prices were actually going down as you looked at more of the tours. And that ended up seeing a 40% uplift in revenue. That this is what we're optimizing for, that we're not trying to optimize the trick. We're trying to just make things easier for you to understand, so you can really understand the value of what you're getting.
Mm-hmm. Just something that just dawned on me, Joe, as you're talking about this and your background as a designer too. So we've talked about copy, we talked about storytelling a little bit and calls to action, but what about just design, of a page, and how important is that, if at all? It feels like it probably is, but can you just talk a little bit about that? And is there even a way to maybe talk about that hierarchically, copy versus design, versus page flow? I mean, the psychology of the user, how do those things play into that?
So that's what we talked about a little bit earlier, that I feel like a lot of companies, especially web companies, like to do this thing where they just find a template online, move around some stuff, hand it over to a client and say, here, plug in your information. When really they're guessing at what should be on that homepage. And what a lot of sites lack is a sales narrative. They don't understand actually how they're taking someone through this. That if you start to look at your website as a real person, you get to control everything that person says, what they're wearing, what they look like. You get to dress up your salesperson so they can say what they need to and make sure they're saying the right things at the right time. And that design aspect should be helping to complement. Is that I don't want you to pick a picture because you thought it looked like a good picture. I want you to pick that picture because people on that pizza tour wondered, how much pizza am I going to eat? And you can show them in a picture how much pizza they get in one setting. That we can use images and design to address objections and provide more information, and not just show pretty pictures.
No.
Yeah, and actually, one thing I'll add to that too is, I've never, I don't have a design in background. That's never been anything that that I've focused on. I've always, partnered with really, smart, talented people. But one thing that I do help a lot of my clients with is to understand, for example, your homepage. Someone who's getting there for the first time. As a business owner, there's a whole lot of stuff that we want people to know about. We want to communicate a lot of stuff about our product and our people and our history and everything that makes us great, the stuff that that we know inside. But a lot of times that is not the stuff that is going to convert those prospects when they get to your sites. So you have to kind of again, it's comes back to what Joe was saying about empathy. I mean, you have to really understand kind of the mindset of the person coming to your site, and knowing I'm going to, give them just enough information to get them to take that next step, whatever that next step is. And there's a bunch of stuff that you're going to want to share, and you're going to have content and other places on your site where, had time and a place where people will go, seek out that information. But when it comes to the experience and that stuff that the customers are interacting with. Keep it simple. Keep it not a ton of copy, not even a ton of design. Really, just it's giving them just the information they need to take that next step, and that's what that next step is a big part of the strategy of just keeping it simple and just literally your job is to kind of get that person from point A to point B.
One of the things. Go ahead, Zach.
Sorry, G-rated. Keep it simple. Stupid. Kiss. So on that note, piggybacking off of Joe and Dan, I heard this interesting analogy just recently about empathy and sales and putting yourself in someone's shoes with regard to CRO. And it really hit home for me because I'm sure all of us have been on both sides of this. Once I tell it, it's the trade show analogy, right? You're on the exhibit floor of a trade show.
Yeah.
You're walking down one of the aisles and you're looking, and you've got all of these vultures, right? Trying to jump out at you. And you're just like, wait, all I want to do is see what you're doing to see if it fits me. Right. And the parallel for a website and along this line of empathy and building pages or sites that convert are having this empathy and not being a vulture, right? So the vulture is the website, as Joe just said, that pastes sign up for demo all over the site and just jumping down your throat when you really haven't done anything to lead the user down that path to really get them to do that demo or sign up for the free product. And it's about that journey and giving them little samples and nuggets so that they can understand and learn and take a peek and figure out if they want to demo or try the free product or even purchase. So it is a lot about understanding, putting yourself in your user or customer's shoes, building that empathy. But again, I'll just go out on record and don't be a vulture. Like, try and be a little bit more subtle and a little bit more tactical about what you're trying to do. So you can try and tease the user a bit.
Yeah, my theory there is that there's only probably 3 to 5 things you need to say to someone to get them to take that next action. Now, yes, there's absolutely variances. And if you're trying to sell something, there's probably certain things you need to say to sell. The price point matters. But it comes down to those 1 or 2 sentences. And both Zach and Dan hit on this, that Dan said person, Zach said user, and thinking singularly is such a big component of it. Is just learn how to sell one customer. One of my favorite Claude Hopkins quotes, learn how to sell the one before you try to sell the thousands. Figure it all the way out, and that you want to say so much. And one of the things that a lot of companies do is they put on their site, they start their sentences with we. Dan, I'm sure you probably see this a lot. Everyone, this is what we do. We do this. Then they refer to themselves in the third person just to change it up so they don't have to refer to themselves as we. And then in the next sentence, they start with the word us. All the same thing. Start those sentences with the word you instead. And it's a nice little trick that all of a sudden you start writing the sentence for the customer. You write it in the way that they're going to read it instead of writing it how you want to say it.
That's great. It's a great point. And Dan, I want to kick this over to you to just layer on top of this the psychology between the implicit, explicit, and philosophical aspects of storytelling and how, however you want to talk it through, whether you do it anecdotally or just talk it through. But, I think that's really layers nicely onto what Joe's talking about is, in the mind of the user, the customer, whatever we want to say, there are these 3 things at play. And so would you mind, giving us the thumbnail of that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, how much time do we have? I could probably talk for a couple hours on this. This is sort of like the stuff I nerd out on, right? Storytelling is, there's an art and a science to it. And all of it's rooted in, 2,000 years of evidence that storytelling is the best way to communicate with someone and to get their attention and to captivate them and to get them to sort of forget all the stuff that distracts us every day of every second of every day, really. And so it's kind of, it's the art and the science. So it's really interesting. The human brain has a couple dominant functions. One is like just to help us survive and to keep us from burning too many calories, whether it's reading a book or watching a movie or literally doing something at work. We're exhausted sometimes, and it's only because we've been thinking about stuff. And so the second we are communicating a message or telling a story or talking about a product or a service, and that starts to get confusing or it starts to get complicated, or we're maybe all over the place, or it's not like the stuff we were just talking about. It's not written about our audience or for our audience. People catch on to that really quickly and they tune it out. And it's almost a subconscious thing that, their brains are telling them this is not worth our time. Like we should move on to something different. And so that's sort of that's the kind of the science of it. And then the art of storytelling is sort of the practice of keeping your message as as simple as you can possibly get it. Use the fewest amount of words. I mean, it is an art form to tell a story in a single headline or in a few sentences. And so when you can do that, it's the best of both worlds. You're not making people work too hard. You're communicating that message. It's about your audience. And those are all the things you need if you're trying to really, really quickly and efficiently convert people.
Yeah. So when I go through that with people and we talk about making it simple and getting the phrasing down correctly, that Dan, I know you've had this challenge of trying to work people into it. Mine is always, I make them explain it to my grandmother, and I want you to tell me in a way that my grandmother understands what you're saying and what you do. If she doesn't understand it, we're out. Too complicated.
No, it's a great point. And I want to get Zach's opinion on something. Joe, I think you did, if we're going back to the CRO, so what we've talked about so far is saying, here's what CRO is, here's the value of it, here's how it's applied, here's how storytelling and copywriting and CTAs, design even, are a part of it. But let's get just super practical. Are there things that you can tell people, or you do tell people about CRO, that they can just take away today and apply? And then I'd like to maybe do a couple, and then I'd like to get Zach's opinion on that as well, on what you're saying.
Well, let's take a page out of what everybody is saying here, and I think there's been some very practical advice given, and we haven't said this to our clients, but I think explain it to me like I'm your grandmother is a great one. And that needs to be put on a page for sure. Practical advice tip number 2 is like Dan said, is keep it simple. Keep the page simple, keep everything very simple and easy. And with that should be fast, of course. And then from a more executionary step, and this is something I know Joe does and we do as well, in terms of how you're looking at analyzing these things, it doesn't have to be, and I've actually read a lot of people on how they do this. It doesn't, the testing these things doesn't have to be super complicated. Come up with a couple different hypotheses as to, take a page, for example, your homepage or a key landing page. Take a couple hypotheses of what users are doing, and make a couple changes and pass them over to your web team and see what happens over a small course of time. If you got a lot of traffic, a couple weeks. If you don't have a lot of traffic, it might be a couple months. But if a page or an interior page, landing page, or your homepage is not doing what you want, change it and don't wait.
That's if they even know if it's doing what they want it to. There's just, I think a lot of people go into it and they don't understand the end result they're trying to get, which is always one of those first things. We need to know what we want to measure before we start looking for the data to figure out what we're trying to measure. And so getting some of those things in place. To add into your bullet points, a few that I always promote of things that I've seen on a lot of sites is this idea that you need to write sales copy instead of bullshit. Just don't give me the crap about your company. Actually write sales copy. I want you to address someone's objections, which are the reasons they're saying no to buying. I want you to touch on their fears. Why are they afraid to buy from you? Talk about those things. Talk about more in that phrase. So that's number one, write sales copy instead of BS. Number two is to proudly display your unique value proposition. As Dan just talked about, trying to get it down to one sentence. And one sentence should tell me what you do so my grandmother understands it, and then tells me why I want to work with you, why I want to buy what you have. One of the best ones I've seen is a company in San Francisco called Dylan's Tours. And their unique value proposition says mini bikes and electric bike tours to help you see the most iconic sights of San Francisco in one day. I know what you do, minibus and electric bike tours. I know why I want to take this, because I want to see the. If you can get it down to that, you are in fantastic shape, and that should be the first sentence on your website, because we want to lower someone's guard when they get there. We talked a little bit earlier about throwing too much at you. The vulture is just jumping at you. The first thing someone wants to know is, what the hell do you do, and why do I even want this? So probably display that UVP. Number two, use proper call to actions. Understand what next steps someone wants to take at that point. One site that I saw online, they had about 5 different items you could add to the cart. One of them was a visitor badge for $3.99. Another one was, I think, like a stencil set or something for $8.99. And the third one was a $79,999 machine. You're not adding an $80,000 machine to your cart.
Yeah.
But use the right call to reach out to our team, talk to representatives. So using the right call to action. So if you are writing sales copy instead of BS, if you have that UVP out there, if you're using proper CTAs, the only other thing you need to cover are lead magnets, which is just something to capture someone when they get there. Give them something in exchange for their email address. You're in good shape. Final tip, you gotta keep listening. It doesn't stop. We know, I think Dan knows, especially Zach, I know you know, Chris, that we all do this. It never stops. There's no point that we finish a project and we go, cool, it's done. Never happens. It's always evolving.
Yeah, great points. Really good points. And so I thought maybe what we could do now is have sort of a lightning round of things. I'll start it out, but just, within the topics that we've covered today, each of us maybe go around, we'll go Joe, Dan, Zach, I'll start, and just maybe give one website, maybe 2, or a blog, or a person to follow, that I think people can take away. Maybe they haven't heard of it and they want to learn more, and it's a place that we can guide them, places that we've learned ourselves. I'll start. You talked about copywriting, sales copywriting. So Copy Hackers, I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, right? Just the best. And if you don't know who Copy Hackers is, and you're in a small to mid-sized business and you're a marketer and you're wondering what we mean when we say write marketing and sales copy, that's an amazing place to start. So I'll throw that one out based on what you said, Joe. So you want to share your?
Yeah. I second Copy Hackers fully. That would have been my second choice. And I've actually had the chance to meet Joanna Weave a couple times, and just amazing person.
Oh, it just seems amazing.
What she does. Yeah. So, and I met her at the Conversion XL conference down in Austin, which is my big one I'm going to push, is a site called conversionxl.com. And they have an agency where they actually do conversion optimization, but then they're really big about teaching, paying it forward. And they host an amazing conference every year that's coming up the first week in April of 2020 this year, that I'll be there. Come hang out. Let's go learn conversion stuff. I've learned so much from Conversion XL, from their online courses, their blogs, and then also going to the conferences.
Dan?
So yeah, I would throw out, I think Joe and I talked about this one time, and I tend to tell a lot of people, building a story brand is a really great, oh my gosh, it's a whole company now. Donald Miller is a really brilliant guy, got his start in screenwriting. I mean, he was an author, he wrote books, and then wrote a book, Building a Story Brand, which is all about storytelling and marketing. And really just getting back to the basics of a lot of the stuff we just talked about. And so it's a really great book, and their whole, website and company that they've kind of built around it is just great for businesses of any size. If you're a small business or just getting sort of introduced to this, world of marketing and conversion rate optimization, it's great. And then even for sort of larger, well-established brands, it is such a great sort of like get back to the basics kind of an experience and a website and a company, and it's a great resource for people.
Yep. And I would definitely second that one. For me, what I thought was the most interesting about that is that there is a framework, right? It's not a formula. It's not formulaic that you can just throw against something and everything's going to work. But to read that book and understand what they do, and is it 7 steps, I think, of telling the hero story and who needs to be involved in the hero story. And are you the company, the hero? No, you're the guide. And I think that in and of itself is just sort of a paradigm shift that if you haven't thought about it that way, right, then it is a really eye-opening kind of a thing. So with that, Zach, what's your recommendation?
Mine are mostly podcasts. Actually, I'm more of an oral listener. There's a couple that are actually about digital and sales funnel mystery, conversion rate experts, and target. I think it's called Target Experts, which is also about a lot about the analytics side of Google Optimize and Google Analytics, which are mainstays for us personally. And those are great. There's always like great anecdotal tips and great stories, and a lot of the high level things that we've been talking about today in those specific podcasts. And then so those are a couple of mine.
Yeah, all great stuff. So as we wrap up today, and this has been just a great conversation, I just want to go around to each person. Dan, I'll start with you. Any other things that you want to just share with folks and say, hey, when it comes to this stuff, here's what I wanted you to take away from today and take with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing is a lot of what we're talking about is when you really break it down, it's getting back to a lot of the basics. I think it can be tempting for people to get a little carried away and get overwhelmed with, CRO, there's this whole brand new way of thinking that I have to now like get on board, and if I don't, I'm going to get left behind. And while it might feel that way, I think a lot of what we're talking about is just getting back to the basics and creating really, really simple, effective marketing communications. I think Joe is one that said it. It's not. It is very much, I think, important for a website to kind of have all this stuff be top of mind, but it's across the board. I think it's all about making it really simple for your customers, for your audience, and really understanding them of what they're trying to accomplish and how we as marketers can get them from point A to point B and remove as much friction as possible along the way. So for me, it all kind of comes down to that, and I hope people kind of understand it's not as overwhelming as it might seem, because it's really, to me, it's just a reminder of getting back to a lot of the basics.
I'm going to go off that idea. The basics that I usually break it back down to are the 2 fundamentals of business that I feel like we all heard as children. And then as we start companies, we just ignore it, which is number 1, know yourself. Number 2, know your customer. And we skip over this knowing the customer part. This where I want you to intimately know that. I want you to know what your customer ate for dinner last night. Where did they go? Why did they go there? How many mouths did they have to feed? What did they drive to go pick up dinner? How did they pay for it? Like, the more you can know about them, the more you understand about where your product or service fits and how it can help them the most. So I'm going to second this idea of getting back to basics of know yourself, know your customer.
Yeah, and just piggybacking off that, once you know all of those things, you can tactically strategize against them, right? Like, I mean, that's the executionary side of it, is you can, like Dan said, you can write copy that speaks to their pains. You can design and lay out pages that help them solve their problems. So yeah, I mean, this idea of getting back to basics is really, really, really important. But you do need to also take it that extra step and that extra mile and be measuring. Like, you have to know what you're looking at. You can't just go into your Shopify site and say, oh, I sold $5,000 this month.
Sure.
Right? Like, it's not that simple. Like, yeah, that's awesome, you did, that's sweet, but you could have sold 50 maybe, or we had we refer to this a lot. We did a project last year. You'll love this one, Joe. We did a project last year, mid last year, for an organization, and they had a directive to collect some more first party data, right? Like, pretty easy seemingly. Like, they had been collecting first party data for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years. They only had a few thousand records. Well, we went across the site and sort of broke apart the site and injected a bunch of CTAs with well-formed copy and well-formed CTA copy, and we took what they had collected over the past 3 years, and we doubled that in 6 weeks. And so, it was these little things that you can do. And the biggest thing there was, like, we gave them our client the tools and the data to go back to their higher ups and say, hey, look what these guys are doing, look what we're doing now. And it's interesting too, because we're all in client services, right? Like, you need people on the client side to advocate for you. So you need to give them the tools to meet their objectives, right? Like, they're hiring you, or they're hiring us, or whomever, because they've got a problem, and we've got to give them the information so that they can go back to whoever their boss is or whatever, and say, yeah, hey boss, guess what? I just solved our problem. Here it is. Here's the information, right? So yes. So at the core of it, we've got to do all these things, and getting back to basics and keeping it simple, and talking to our grandmother and putting it in the simplest of terms. But you've gotta be measuring, and you've got to report on that. And one other thing, I learned this from, she's not there anymore. I think she's actually the CMO at American Heart Association now, but she was the CMO at Thermos at the time. And she was giving a speech for AMA, and she said, the problem with agencies these days and marketing analysts are, they're trying to report on too much data. So work with your clients, work with your bosses. And she said, don't track more than whatever your KPIs are, but don't track more than 4 KPIs at a time for any specific project. Anything else, it's not, data isn't the problem these days. It's getting data drilled down to a point where you can meet your boss's goals, you can meet your client's goals, or and there's something to actually simple to look at against. She's like, there's nothing that drives me more than someone working for me that gives me this mountain of data that then I have to go parse through and sift through and find the answers. I want that all whittled down into 4 simple reportable elements. And it can, it can be anything. It can be click through it can be engagement, it can be anything. But whatever project or engagement that you're working on, simplify it for yourself and simplify it for your client. Because if you can look at just 4 things and report on those 4 things, then you have something to work for, they have something to work for, and it's small and it's tactical and it's digestible, right? So that's my takeaway from today.
Yeah, that's great stuff, guys. I'm really excited about what we talked about today on the episode, and want to spend a special thank you to Joe and Dan for joining us today on the Web Marketing Insights podcast with Gulo Solutions. Me and Zach will see you next time. Appreciate you all tuning in. I'd love to have you subscribe below on YouTube, and look forward to seeing you all again. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for checking out the podcast today. Go to gulosolutions.com to learn more about us. Subscribe to our newsletter. Also, if you can hit subscribe on our channel here on YouTube, that would be great as well.